Well, I'd like to welcome you all to this Restore Labour Democracy rally tonight. My name's Richard Burgon, Member of Parliament for Leeds East, Secretary of the Social Campaign Group of Labour MPs. It's great to see so many people joining this call. This is the first event to the new Restore Labour Democracy coalition. Now, last month, a coalition of trade union leaders, more than 25 Labour MPs and grassroots organisations launched a call demanding the restoration of members' rights and democracy in the Labour Party. In the Restore Labour Democracy statement, we warned that a narrow factional agenda is being imposed upon the party and that this approach is increasingly unpopular with the public. Since then, not only has Labour lost the Gorton and Denton by-election after the ludicrous barring of Andy Burnham, but we have also seen the Mandelson and Labour Together scandals. Let's be clear, this is exactly what happens when a tiny faction at the top of the party engages in factional warfare, when they sideline grassroots members and trade union voices in our party in order to get closer to the rich and powerful and to move away from the real Labour agenda that people are crying out for. The clampdown on the democratic rights of Labour members has gone hand in hand with a whole series of out-of-touch decisions from the leadership that have left the Prime Minister and the government deeply unpopular. From the mess over winter fuel payments to the appalling disability cuts and much more. And to impose this unpopular agenda, we've seen the on from MPs standing up for their constituents. We've seen the mass barring of councillors ahead of the coming local elections, and we've seen all sorts of stitch-ups in internal elections. Now, all of this is totally counterproductive because Labour's greatest strength are its membership and the affiliated trade unions. They provide grounding in communities and a unique link to the working class. Now, as the new statement says, sidelining union and members' voices weakens Labour's roots in our communities, alienates voters, and undermines Labour's ability to win both people's trust and elections. So restoring democracy in the Labour Party is essential if the party is to reconnect with its members, its unions, and the communities it exists to serve. And that's why the signatories of the statement have committed to work together to strengthen our democracy and reverse this damaging behaviour. Now, signatories include general secretaries of Labour-affiliated unions, including UNISON, Unite, the CWU, the FBU, and ASLEF, among many others. Now, if you haven't yet added your name to the statement, you can do that using the link that's in the chat. But to get the changes we need to fight for them. So in the coming weeks and months, we will be coordinating the changes to the party rules that are needed to ensure Labour once again becomes a democratic party rooted in its members and rooted in its movement. Tonight is the start of all of that. And we've got an excellent lineup of speakers who are part of the growing movement to restore democracy in our party. Now, I'll introduce each speaker before they speak, but we're going to start with, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce her, the newly elected Secretary of UNISON, Andrea Egan. Andrea.
Hi there, can you hear me? Super. So hi there, I'm Andrea Egan and I am the General Secretary, newly elected General Secretary of UNISON. And I'm really proud to be here this evening, speaking alongside fantastic comrades like Richard Burgon and John McDonnell, who have fought tirelessly for the left and for democracy in the Labour Party for decades. Now, before my election, UNISON's leadership had backed Keir Starmer at every Labour conference, including enabling his anti-democratic rule changes in 2021. So, whilst we know we've got the Employment Rights Act, which is delivering some important improvements to workers' rights, and that's a testament to the unions, including my own, that act, for instance, has been diluted significantly. Public services are still underfunded. Public sector pay is not being restored, and the government is sticking to unnecessarily restrictive fiscal rules whilst committing to increasing military spending and refusing to introduce a tax on extreme wealth. And while we've seen support given to MPs who have time and time again betrayed our union's policies and acted contrary to the interests of our members. So that's why, as part of my General Secretary campaign, I pledged to end UNISON's subservience to the Labour Party. Now, that doesn't mean simply writing off the party, because there are Labour MPs, not least those backing this important campaign, who consistently stand up for our members and for our values. And not only that, many Labour members agree with us on a number of the key issues. But right now, Labour is failing us, and it's become so historically unpopular precisely because those voices have been aggressively shut down and shut out. And that should be one message from this meeting tonight. Attacks on democracy in Labour have been very damaging for the party, and in turn, they have had serious consequences for the country. Now, since the 2024 general election, we've seen political mistake after political mistake, moral failure after moral failure. Each and every one of these catastrophic, the flawed catastrophes of catastrophe. Oh my goodness, you know what I mean? Catastrophes. They are flawed from the contempt for democracy. So whether it was the proposed cuts to winter fuel payments and personal independence payments, attacking the rights of migrants and refugees, or continuing to arm Israel's genocide in Gaza, or allowing the UK bases to be used in the US war on Iran. These are not the policies of most Labour members. They're not the policies of my union, and they are not the policies of our wider movement. And only in such an undemocratic party then could they have been pushed as Labour government policy. So let's not forget the relatively few MPs who've stood up for working class people, who've stood up for UNISON members, took a stand against these decisions. They've been punished. And why were there though so few? And we need to know why. So many good socialist candidates, good trade union reps backed by the local members, they've been bad for standing for Labour. Bad because they were marked red on Peter Mandelson's big spreadsheet. It hardly needs saying that at this point, but I'll say it again. This is a deeply rotten, nasty, toxic culture, and one that is pushing Labour towards the cliff edge. Now, just look what happened at Gorton and Denton. Labour's first loss in almost a century there. All because the Prime Minister was intimidated by Andy Burnham. And worse than that, he responded to the loss by suggesting thousands upon thousands of progressive voters who will have backed Labour their whole lives were extremists. And I'm absolutely clear, comrades, this cannot go on. We've got 3 years until the next general election, and we're only going to stop the far right if the government starts acting like a government which is for working class people. It's as simple as that. And for that to happen, we really need to restore democracy in Labour. We need grassroots members to have a voice, being able to choose their candidates and have a say in the policy process. And we need MPs like John and Richard to be able to have a voice without the threat of being suspended. And if there is a leadership election, it must be a democratic one with a range of candidates so that trade unions and the membership values are truly represented, not excluded. After all, we're in the trade unions. It was the trade unions that funded this party, not the bankers, not lobbyists, and not wealth worshippers. And I'll finish on this. Restoring democracy in Labour should concern us all, inside the party and out. Mandelson and his apprentices delighted in alienating Labour's base and destroying the party's core coalition, blocking the major trade unions and the socialist left from participating meaningfully in the party was at the centre of that approach. And what a disaster it's been. And we can't stand by and let these people lead us into the ultimate disaster of Farage in number 10 Downing Street. That's why restoring democracy in Labour is so fundamental. So thank you to all the numbers who have logged in tonight. I think this, it's and being involved in this fantastic campaign. And it has been an absolute pleasure to address this meeting this evening. Solidarity. Thanks, Richard.
So much, Andrea, and it's really exciting to have you in such a prominent role in the labour and trade union movement, which brings me on to our next speaker, who I'm delighted to introduce, who's Steve Wright, and he was elected as the General Secretary of the Fire Brigades Union a year ago, and he certainly hit the ground running industrially and politically, and been a strong voice on members' terms and conditions, and a strong voice in terms of domestic political issues, but also important international issues as well. It's been great to see him on the national media recently as well. So I'm delighted to introduce Steve Wright.
Well, thanks, Richard, and hello, good evening all, and well, fantastic to have Andrea speaking before me. But look, what I will say before we start to identify some of the practical steps as to what Labour should do to reclaim, or what we should do to reclaim the Labour Party, I think we need a narrative as to why we should reclaim Labour. And if you look politically, they're in the wrong place. I think most people here would agree on that. And there are practical consequences of that, them being in the wrong place on all these issues. So for the people of this country and for our members, for members of the Labour Party, there are electoral consequences as well, which I'll come on to. But politically, it's hard to argue that at best, Labour in government hasn't been very good. And that, depending on what your viewpoint is or where you sit, it's been an absolute disaster, hasn't it? Two-child benefit cap, WASPy women, the social security in general, planned capital spending cuts on the NHS, and so on. The list is endless. We ourselves in the Fire and Rescue Service have witnessed this, proposed cuts to the Fire and Rescue Service across the UK, in many parts of the country, that will have real dire consequences, not just for firefighters, but for members of the public. And we know fundamentally that situation could be reversed by central funding from central government. So we want to see an end to austerity, and we're not seeing it. That's certainly what I hear when I attend fire stations and control rooms where I represent members, is that they still feel that they're in the midst of austerity that we all hoped and thought we changed when we voted for Labour 2 years ago. So that's something as well I think we need to reflect on, the absolute shambles and the debacle around Mandelson, something so obvious and yet so easily avoidable, that cuts, I think, to the heart of this debate, actually, a factional appointment that shows how the internal politics at play inside the party play out on a world stage. We've become a laughing stock in many parts of the country. People I speak to internationally are laughing at us, I think, and it's been an absolutely disastrous approach that has to end. But look, what are the consequences of this, I suppose, is the question, isn't it? And that the current narrative is that Labour is facing a disaster at the upcoming elections in May. If you look at council elections, by-election results since May of last year, the party has lost 51 seats. And we were looking at this today within our office about what we can do about that in some of the important seats where we need councillors, because we have seen the chaos that is ensued when Reform got into power in Kent County Council. But look, these seats that have been lost, they're not a forecast, they're not an assumption, it is a matter of fact. The actions of the Labour Party in government have consequences, and the consequences that we have seen on the front line democratically has been councillor after councillor losing their seats, while Reform UK has gained 64 seats in that same period. So what the party is doing in office is ultimately being rejected by those that are putting their crosses in the ballot boxes, the electorate in huge numbers, actually. And I think what's interesting is that what those losses show is that Labour's vote share has come down by 15%, or that their vote has been 15%, whilst the average opinion poll registers them at 19%. So when you look at that, in other words, Labour is actually performing worse in actual elections than it is in the polls. Who'd have thought that? And that culminated in the disastrous Gorton and Denton by-election, where we saw, and I'm sure you all saw on this call, MP after MP telling us that it was on a knife edge and there was a possibility that we were going to win. We were certainly asked to go door knocking as a union, but actually the fact that did come true was that we were beaten into third place by Reform. So there's a level of delusion within certain parts of this party right now that has got to stop. And it's why we have to reclaim the party, and an important meeting that's been called tonight. And I'm glad to be able to share our views from our union within this space. But look, it's not going to be easy. And I think it does mean a lot of hard work. And I know many of us have been here before. It does mean building campaigns, I believe, that cut across society that we use as a lobbying tool to begin to start shifting the party back towards the traditional socialist base, which I know many people on here will support. So I encourage everyone who is here within a union, within whatever field you're working in, whatever sector you're working in, whatever level of the union you're in, let's start making demands on your leadership. Start making demands of those leaders within those unions to put the government under pressure so that the government starts acting in the interests of our class. But look, gains like this are not going to be easy, but we do need to exert pressure at every level of our class and within our trade unions. So I think it's about setting our stall out on some very basic arguments. And I've got 4 listed when Richard asked me to speak, what I think those 4 key elements would be. I think the first one is that public ownership works and there should be more of it. Let's make that fundamental and clear. Secondly, to make the point that we need more workers' rights and we can allow no more watering down of what little we do have. Thirdly, would be around there needs to be an end to wealth inequality and start lifting people out of poverty pay and taxing the rich. And then the fourth one, which we're keen to push forward this agenda within our union over the next couple of months, is having an international agenda should be one of peace and not one of permanent war. So look, we cannot leave this stage, I think is my message here today. We need to embed ourselves within CLPs, become more and not less active, actually, despite what might seem futile at the moment with what we're doing. But look, make sure that we stand on the platform of those 4 key points that I see as fundamental. Nominate and support people within the party to take positions and support those that share our wider values. That's certainly what I'll be doing as the General Secretary of an affiliated union, taking these central arguments to the wider group of affiliated unions so we can see that change developing. And look, I mentioned Andrea again. Andrea, Egan elected as the General Secretary of UNISON. Sharon Graham reducing the affiliation to the party. Look, these are signs of discontent that we need to harness and coalesce around. But look, what we have seen is disaster after disaster. I think it's about getting on the front foot, reclaiming our party on those socialist values that we all support, working with those who share our broader aims to begin to pull this party back to where it belongs. It will be tough, it will be hard, but I think collectively we can do that. We need a socialist party full of working people, and we need a government that's acting in the interests of working people as well. But thank you for your time tonight. Cheers, Richard.
Thanks so much, Steve. That was fantastic. And just to let you all know, there's people from all over who are at this online meeting tonight. I've just done a quick list, and it's some list. We've got people from Cornwall, Plymouth, Bristol, Poole, London, Oxford, Luton, Cambridge, Nottingham, Newark, Lichfield, Rugby, Smethwick, Chesterfield, Leeds, of course, Bury, Stockport, Oldham, Durham, Fife, Kilmarnock, and Kirkcaldy. Now, Kilmarnock and Kirkcaldy, I'm sure they're fans of Brian Leishman, but I'm sure there's everyone on this call is a fan of Brian Leishman, so it's not just the Scottish comrades. But what a fantastic spread of attendees at tonight's meeting, and that really shows you that there's people all across the piece wanting to get involved with this important campaign. So that's fantastic. I'm now really pleased to introduce our next speaker, one of the leading lights of Momentum that have done such an important job in these difficult times. So I'd like to introduce Alex Charilau. Alex, go for it.
Brilliant. Thanks so much to Richard and everyone else who's been carrying forward Restore Labour Democracy. And thank you for having me here tonight. It's genuinely brilliant to be with hundreds of comrades from across our movement who believe that Labour members' rights matter and that restoring democracy and pluralism inside our party is essential if we want as socialists to transform this country. Momentum was founded on a simple belief that Labour should be a mass democratic movement, a party where members shape the direction of our politics, choose our representatives, and organise together for real change. And that belief is why we're all here tonight. Because over the last few years, too many members have felt their voices pushed to the margins. We've seen decisions made from the top down rather than built from the grassroots up. And if we're honest, that approach isn't just wrong in principle, it's politically self-defeating as well. And we've only got to look at the recent Gorton and Denton by-election, which we've already discussed a bit tonight. That contest showed the extraordinary lengths the leadership was willing to go to in order to block an incredibly popular candidate like Andy Burnham from standing. And if we think about that for a moment, the leadership knew Andy could win, but blocked him anyway. That isn't strategic popular politics, it's the politics of top-down control. And we hear this argument from some at the top of our party that voters have nowhere else to go, that Labour can take support for granted when push comes to shove against reform. But that assumption has been tested and disproven. When people feel ignored or taken for granted, they begin to look elsewhere. If we want voters to trust Labour again, Labour has to start by trusting its own members. Because how are communities supposed to have faith in our party if we treat our own activists, the people who knock doors, organise campaigns, build our labour movement, with contempt? And the problems don't stop there. The scandals involving Mandelson and McSweeney have exposed something deeper, a culture at the top of the party that prioritises control over democracy. We recently learned Mandelson was playing a pivotal role in long-listing candidates for parliamentary selections. That should concern every single Labour member, left, right and centre. Because the Labour Party doesn't belong to a handful of insiders in Westminster, it belongs to its members, trade unions and communities. The politics of control isn't how we build a winning movement, it's how we hollow one out. So the question isn't just what's gone wrong, the question is what we can do about it. At Momentum, we've always believed the answer lies in grassroots organising. We've been campaigning for years for a more democratic, member-led Labour Party, and that work goes on. We're supporting fantastic democratic socialist candidates like Gemma, who's with us on the call tonight, in key internal Labour elections, from the NEC to the MPF, people who will stand up for members' rights and democratic accountability across our party. And we're encouraging Socialist Labour members across the country to stand as conference delegates this year, because Labour Conference is one of the biggest opportunities we have to shape the direction of the Labour Party, and it remains a crucial arena for us in the fight to restore democratic rights in our movement. We're backing two really important rule changes at conference this year. The first would lower the MP nomination threshold for future leadership contests, making it possible again for candidates with genuine grassroots support to be able to stand. And the second would restore the right of CLPs to control long listing in parliamentary selections. These are practical, concrete steps to rebalance power in our party, not away from winning elections, but towards the democratic energy that actually makes winning possible. Because the truth is this, the Labour Party is strongest when it's a movement, when members feel empowered, when local parties are trusted, when people believe they have a real stake in shaping the future of our politics. That's the Labour Party we all believe in. That's the Labour Party we're organising for. And with comrades like all of you here tonight, I'm confident together we can win that fight. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much, Alex. And I think it's an important point that Alex made in relation to the threshold to get a candidate on the ballot paper. We saw, and we're going to hear from Ribeiro Addy later when she stood for deputy leader, we saw in practice what that was about. So, Keir Starmer and the team around him have doubled the number of MPs required to get on the ballot paper. And the reason they've done that is an attempt to shut out candidates that party members would like to vote for. I think that should be seen as a temporary aberration because it was brought in by Keir Starmer, attached to Keir Starmer in order to solidify his position. Once he goes, I think that should be dropped and we should return to business as it used to be and allow members to have their say. And this brings me on to our next speaker, Paul Holden, who is the author of a devastating tome of evidence of what's gone wrong and why, where this anti-democratic culture has come from. He in his book, The Fraud, he charts the history of this concerning anti-democratic authoritarian trend within the party. And I'm really looking forward to hearing from him now, Paul.
Hi, thanks, Richard. And thanks for inviting me on to speak to the rally, which is incredibly important. So the fraud is the result of a 3-year-long investigation, almost 4-year-long investigation into a particular faction that I believe has effectively captured the Labour Party, much to its long-term democratic detriment. In fact, I think that this is a political faction that is not just undemocratic, but is at times actively anti-democratic and emerge from a deeply anti-democratic impulse. And of course, I'm speaking in sort of broad terms about what I call in the book the Labour Together project, but has also been called the McSweeney project, and more recently, the McSweeney-Starmer-Mandelson project, which might be getting somewhere to getting to the truth of the matter. I think the useful thing to say, I'm not going to speak for too long. I'll give a broad overview of what I think my investigation's uncovered, and then where I think the Labour Party could go next. But I think the useful thing to bear in mind is this political project that starts in earnest in 2017 has longer historical roots in the party. And in fact, it's a spiritual inheritor, if you will, of a much longer visceral rejection of the election of Jeremy Corbyn as the leader of the Labour Party, which in itself was, really quite a deep and fundamental rejection of the idea that the membership should be allowed to choose leaders who upset particular factions within the political party. And I'll use this moment now because one of my big bugbears is the extent to which the Labour Party has utterly failed in any sort of meaningful way to investigate what's known as the Egan House scheme, which I detail a lot in my book, which involved the systematic diversion of internal party funds towards factionally selected candidates who were contesting seats that were not in danger during the 2017 election, and away from funding the election of candidates in seats that were actually targets of the formal election campaign. I think it says a lot about the integrity and the quality of Keir Starmer's leadership of the Labour Party, that despite being asked by United Union to conduct a forensic audit of that, it's never been done. It's in fact never effectively been investigated. And I raise serious concerns in my book about what that scheme actually involved. Now, the Labour Together project is a project that I've tracked in considerable detail. And effectively, what we're looking at is a 3-phase project. In the first phase is 2017 to 2020. And this is a project that's led by Morgan McSweeney via Labour Together, uses as a primary vehicle. And really, it set out to achieve 2 things. One is to destroy the credibility and viability of a left-led Labour Party, and the second is to create the conditions for the second thing, which is to choose a leader of their liking and install him as leader of the Labour Party through a campaign of misdirection and I think premeditated dishonesty. which is then borne out by the Labour leadership election, where Keir Starmer makes a whole series of pledges and statements of principle that bear absolutely no resemblance to how he then runs the party, and literally no resemblance whatsoever to how he now runs the country. And I suspect that if actually he was running the country like he promised he would back in 2020, the Labour Party and he would be considerably more popular than he is now. Now that project from 2017 to 2020, as I've said again and again and again till I'm blue in the face, is funded with a pot of money that's not declared in violation of electoral law by Morgan McSweeney. Again, another matter which I don't think has been properly investigated. And the Electoral Commission has refused again and again and again to release information that's plainly in the public interest about the nature of that investigation and whether Labour Together was candid in its responses to the Electoral Commission while under investigation. What I think defines that period, the more I think back to it, the more I look at it, it now does seem to me that there is a pretty profound relationship between Morgan McSweeney and Peter Mandelson that at least becomes active in the Labour Party as an operational relationship from 2021 onwards. But I definitely think this 2017 to 2020 phase definitely has the fingerprints of a Mandelsonian method in using all sorts of dirty tricks and astroturf campaigns and media manipulation to really undermine the credibility and viability of the Labour Party to actually win an election against the Tories in 2019 and guaranteeing things like a hard Brexit. And the second phase is, effectively on the election of Keir Starmer. It allows Morgan McSweeney and his allies to take over the bureaucracy to all intents and purposes, where you have key figures associated with Labour Together and the Labour Together project dominating the NEC, people like Shabana Mahmood, for example, and installing people like David Evans as the General Secretary. David Evans was very close to Morgan McSweeney and to Steve Reed and all their particular allies. And there's a process, a very clear-eyed and explicit process of narrowing the possibility of democratic decision-making in the Labour Party, which then becomes most clearly expressed at the 2021 conference, where the leadership rules are changed. As Andrea mentioned, it seems with the assistance, I think, of at least some UNISON delegates there. But which I think, which in the retelling has been lost, is the extent to which that has involved using the bureaucracy to control who could and couldn't attend that meeting. Then the third phase is the phase that we all are living with the consequences of, which is that there is an aggressive process of controlling who will be selected as an MP in the Labour Party, because the result in 2019 means that effectively this very small cabal of bureaucrats led by Morgan McSweeney can choose 200 MPs effectively fresh from their filofaxes. And there is, I think we all know about the stories that have been told about the ways in which the long listing was controlled or circumvented. Eventually, the NEC is actually just appointing people directly to various seats. I think what's missed in that discussion is the extent to which Labour Together is involved. It gets reactivated effectively after being dormant. And from late 2023 onwards, it effectively becomes a vehicle through which very substantive amounts of money from a very small number of millionaire donors and billionaire donors is filtered into Labour Together and then used to support the election campaigns of around about 100 MPs who've effectively been chosen as the vanguard of the McSweeneyite faction in Parliament. Now, this is very disturbing. Not least because at exactly the same time between in late 2023 and early 2024, when this process gets underway, is the same time that Labour Together is using this vast pot of money to hire private intelligence firms and agencies to go after journalists like myself and Gabriel Poggart at the Sunday Times, who are reporting on public interest stories about McSweeney and this money and his dirty tricks campaigns that he ran between 2017 and 2020. So literally at the same time that Labour Together is funding and helping to choose the intake of 100 MPs, it's also simultaneously funding these genuinely despicable campaigns that are being condemned by Index and Censorship and the National Union of Journalists to go after journalists like myself. At a deeper fundamental structural level, what that means is that you effectively have a cohort of MPs who come in who are entirely disconnected and not accountable to their own constituents. Because really who they're accountable to is the bureaucrats who chose them and the funders who are funding them. And makes, from a governance perspective, which is my background, an anti-corruption background, it is a massive waving red flag, because you effectively have people who are disconnected from their constituents and the broader movement, and who are eminently biddable and clubbable for lobbying firms and for vested interests, which is very concerning. We now have this very undemocratic project that I think lacks popular legitimacy in a very deep and profound way, doing things like removing fundamental civil liberties like attacking jury trials and the rights to protest, and prescribing organizations like Palestine Action. And this is a very disturbing and damaging place for British democracy as a whole to be, but it's absolutely existential for the Labour Party. Because the Labour Party is, as we all know, I think it's less popular than the polls are suggesting. Because actually, when the Labour Party's popularity is tested in the crucible of an election, the results are poorer than the polls are suggesting, as Steve just mentioned. Kai Philly is a very good example of that, losing a seat that, you know, in a constituency that the Labour Party's held for 100 years, and the same thing in Gorton and Denton, all of which is avoidable. If the Labour Party had not been so aggressively hostile towards anything that vaguely looks like a progressive opinion. And second of all, if they allowed Labour internal democracy to function, because if you had Labour internal democracy function, Andy Burnham would have been the candidate in Gorton and Denton, he would have won. I think that's pretty clear. So this is existential to the party. It's extremely destructive to the party's reputation. And I think it's now an emergency for the Labour Party and for all its MPs who are associated with it, anybody who wants to see it survive as a political project, to fight back against this capture and to undo it. And I think there's two things. I'm not going to get into policy suggestions, which Momentum and others will have a much better idea of. But I think at the most fundamental level, we've learned, my experience from South Africa in particular, where you have these projects of state capture, is they do not get unraveled on their own. There needs to be a full, unfettered, independent inquiry into the various campaigns that were launched between 2015 and now to effectively undermine democracy in the Labour Party and capture it, and all the manifestly unlawful conduct that I identify in my book. And there really is quite an astonishing array of unlawful conduct that I've identified that was used to undermine democracy in the Labour Party. I also think I'm very concerned, and I think lots of people have mentioned to me privately, there's serious concerns about the cogency of the internal selection process via the anonymous voter platform. That should need to be investigated. And I think there should be an immediate audit of anonymous voter results. And then the last thing is, as I would say to all the MPs who are here, or Momentum as well, is that there is eventually a leadership challenge that has long been suspected, that Momentum gives long, hard thought to ensuring that it only backs a candidate that is not associated with the Labour Together project in any way. And that includes either not being mentioned in Labour Together, but also not being funded by Labour Together, and most importantly for me, not being funded by the funders of Labour Together. I think it's really important. I think that really what the Labour Party needs to do is to reset fundamentally by choosing somebody who is untainted by the vicious, deeply pathological factionalism that has made the Labour Party a democratically dysfunctional institution for so long, so that it can be revitalized. And it can be revitalized, but it will require a leader who's outside of that the faction to do so. In that, I wish you all luck in that project. And of course, I'm just to say to anybody from around the country, I'm still touring the book. I'm very happy to speak to groups. I'm very happy to speak online to anybody who wants to hear from me. I'm very happy to share all the implications of my findings with anybody who wants to hear them. But thank you very much for your time.
Thanks so much, Paul. That was really illustrative. I hope people get the chance to read Paul's book. And just to give another plug, if you want to hear more from Paul, a good way to do that is to look at a very detailed, lengthy interview Paul did with the Labour Left podcast from Bryn Griffiths, and that's out now on YouTube and all podcast platforms and Audible. So you can see a big long interview with Paul conducted by Bryn on all the issues that are raised in his book. So thanks so much, Paul. I think the link is there in the chat to the Labour Left podcast interview with Paul. Now, our next speaker is Belle Ribeiro Addy. I think she might not be with us yet. So I'll move on while we wait for her to our good friend from the Campaign for Labour Party Democracy, Rachel Garnham. Now, the Campaign for Labour Party Democracy, CLPD, was in on the act early, in that when the the Labour governments in the 70s betrayed the democratic will of their members and ended up getting turfed out of office. As a result, the Campaign for Labour Party Democracy was founded, played a key role in the early 1980s in democratising the party membership in the party further. In fact, if it wasn't for CLPD, members would never have had a say in any way whatsoever in who the Labour Party leader was. It had just been left to MPs alone. And so CLPD, the Campaign for Labour Party Democracy, is a vital part of this movement, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce one of the leading lights of that important organisation, Rachel Garnham.
Thanks, Richard, and thanks for organising the rally, and really welcome this new statement and organisation, and thanks for stealing a little bit of my speech and also introducing me, or saying you might get Belle, but no, she's not here yet, you've got to have Rachel instead, because I can't pretend to be as good as Belle, but I have got a few things to say that hopefully will be useful for those of us sort of having the fight in the Labour Party. So as I said, I'm the chair of the Campaign for Labour Party Democracy. Restoring Labour Party democracy is our bread and butter, and it's great to work across member organisations, MPs and unions to make this call for Labour to start listening to its individual and affiliated members and change course. And it's important we change course as soon as we possibly can, with such important elections coming up in Scotland and Wales, as well as across England. I did want to say a little bit about CLPD's experience of campaigning for Labour Party democracy, and for those of us who are willing to have that necessary fight in the Labour Party against the war drive, against the rising tide of racism, and against austerity and cuts in the welfare state, for public investment and action on climate, why Labour Party democracy is actually fundamental to what we can do right now. As Richard said, CLPD was founded over 50 years ago with two major goals: to democratise the election of the leader of the Labour Party, to include members and trade unionists in electing the leader rather than just MPs, and to make those MPs accountable to local members and the trade unionists through mandatory reselection. We were then aligned with the women's sections and the black sections of the 1980s, which campaigned with some success for women's and black representation and for the voices of women and black members to be heard. And it is, I think, these three areas where we once again need to focus our campaigns to ensure members' voices are heard and to save the Labour Party as it was founded to promote public ownership with its organised link to the working class through the trade unions. Over that 50 years, and before that, and for the foreseeable future, there has always been a battle for members to have more influence, which has ebbed and flowed, and which we now need to step up again. As Naib Evans said, the right wing of the Labour Party would rather see it fall into perpetual decline than abide by its democratic decisions. And by the right, I mean the tiny minority of activists who organise against the interests of the vast majority of Labour members and trade unionists who are based in our communities and just want a better future for our communities, for the country and for the world. So too often, and in particular in the run-up to the last general election, excellent local candidates embedded in their communities with strong support were ruled out on dubious grounds, and candidates from the right network of preferred candidates, bag carriers and yes people were imposed, or CLPs got to choose between two identikit candidates. And now we have a PLP, as has already been said, with some very honourable exceptions, lacking support, experience or independent mindedness. And we are seeing the same in local government under the guise of the campaign improvement boards. And Labour won't reverse its falling support unless local members are allowed to select the best candidates locally, and Labour members and local trade unions are best placed to know who those candidates are. On the leadership elections, while some improvements were made under Jeremy's leadership that have been reversed, the current leadership have not yet managed to abolish member and union voting altogether, as I'm sure some would like to. However, as again Richard mentioned earlier, the barrier to get onto the ballot paper is ridiculously prohibitive. So in the recent deputy leadership election, candidates who have a a sensible mainstream position on opposing pandering to reform's racist agenda, on wanting to spend money on the NHS and not on war, and on defending disability benefits like Bell, who hopefully will be with us soon, are not able to get on the ballot paper. So CLPD will continue to push for rule changes, seeking to lower the threshold so members and unions get a genuine choice. Thirdly, CLPD's historic call for women and black members to be able to self-organise and make policy is also more important than ever. The current Labour leadership has run down the role of Women's Conference and the National Women's Committee, which we reinstituted when Jeremy was leader. It has diminished and undermined the youth structures, even calling for new elections when it doesn't get the result it wants, potentially. It has refused to implement structures for disabled members and black, Asian and minority ethnic members, unsurprisingly at a time when a Labour government is attacking disability benefits, peddling a racist agenda on immigration and continuing its own brand of austerity, which disproportionately impacts women and young people. Democratic structures for equality strands and for young members must remain central to our demands so these voices are heard and the government changes course. And I think this is particularly important with the disgusting Islamophobia that we see on a daily basis, but particularly that was peddled in the wake of the Gorton and Denton by-election, and something we all need to push back on within the Labour Party and outside. There's not much time left to speak, but there is a lot we need to do. So we must continue our fight against the war drive, racism and austerity, both within and outside the Labour Party, working together within and outside. A more democratic Labour Party would strengthen these campaigns. We must, in the Labour Party, vote for Gemma Bolton, Yasmin Dar and Minesh Parekh in the elections to Labour's National Executive Committee, which come up this summer. All you need to do is to be a Labour member to do that. You don't even have to attend a CLP meeting. So worth staying to make sure our voices, the voices of members, are heard on the National Executive Committee. We can engage our fellow members in policy discussion and submit progressive positions to the National Policy Forum consultation. There are flaws in that, but it is another platform for us to push the agenda that Labour should be pursuing in government. And we can join and be active in left socialist societies like the Socialist Health Association, Socialist Education Association, Disability Labour, and be active in our affiliated unions to ensure they use their weight to advocate for party democracy. And I'd also like to welcome Andrea's speech earlier. And I think, there is progress to be made in difficult times. And finally, as Alex said, we can organise for this year's Labour Women's Conference and annual conference. We need delegates to vote for CLPD's candidates for the National Women's Committee and our left candidates for the National Policy Forum, National Constitutional Committee. We need rule changes submitted that will give us a better leadership election, that will make local selections more democratic. And we can submit motions that can build on the success of last year's position for full sanctions against Israel, recognising the genocide in Gaza that came about because of that coalition of members of trade unions and affiliates. So just to conclude, I will finish with a quote from the legendary Diane Abbott MP, who said, "One thing I have learnt from some years in politics, many years in politics, victory or defeat are rarely final. So you keep on fighting." So solidarity, comrades, and let's keep going. Thank you.
Much, Rachel. That was really, really useful, setting out some of the tasks we've got ahead of us. So on this Zoom, there's been 350 people signed in, but it's over 400 people taking part in this meeting as they're streaming from elsewhere too. We've still got some great speakers to come. We've got Ribeiro Addy, MP, as we've heard. We've got Leishman MP. We've got Gemma Bolton from the Labour Party National Executive Committee. We've got McDonnell MP. We've got Dr. Rathi Guhadasan from the Socialist Health Association, which has just been quite rightly mentioned as a socialist society by Rachel. And we've got Burgon MP as well. So quite a few excellent speakers still to come. And on that note, I'm going to pass over to Brian Leishman, who I would like to remind people, was elected for the first time in the 2024 general election. So he's a socialist who managed to slip through the McSweeney, Mandelson, Starmer nets. And aren't we glad that he did so? Brian.
Good evening, comrades. It's a pleasure to talk with you tonight and listen to the other fantastic speakers that we've already heard and we will hear from later. As you'd expect of someone with my accent, I plan to talk about the state of things for the party in Scotland, especially important as we have Holyrood elections coming up very shortly in May. And so, for those perhaps not as familiar as others, a little bit of Scottish political context might be useful. The similarities between the Tories being in government for 14 years and the SNP closing fast in on 2 decades of being in power in Scotland are many. In Scotland, we've got poverty and inequality that have gotten remarkably worse under the SNP these last 2 decades. We have got incredible differences between the education attainment of children from the least and the most advantaged areas. We still have an extremely wide and stubborn gender pay gap. Rural poverty is on the rise due to dwindling transport, healthcare and employment opportunities in the more remote parts of the country. But the most startling and devastating inequality that we have in Scotland is in life expectancy. That's perfectly shown in the example in my constituency and in the neighbouring constituency between Sauchie and Dollar, 2 towns that are just 6 miles apart. And in those 6 miles, the life expectancy is 10 years less for a Sauchie resident than it is for someone from Dollar. Now, for some communities in my constituency, the data from the Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivations is bordering on Dickensian levels of poverty, up there with the very worst in the whole country. And that can't be a surprise because Scottish public services have been hollowed out these last 2 decades. We've got less police officers, less firefighters, libraries and sports centres are closing all over the country. People are waiting years for operations and treatment. We've got private capital in charge of vital infrastructure, all for shareholder gain to the detriment of public service in need. Consecutive SNP governments have inflicted horrendous austerity onto communities. So it's very similar to the Tories. Now, all of that is recognised by the Scottish electorate, yet Scottish Labour cannot seem to make any political headway. When we look at it from the devolution period, in 1999, Scottish Labour had 55 MSPs. In 2003, the next set of elections, that went down to 50. 4 years later, in 2007, we returned 46. In 2011, it went down to 37. In 2016, only 24. And in 2021, we were further reduced to 22 MSPs. The electorate has consistently rejected Scottish Labour and what we have had to offer. Now, the political direction that the Scottish Labour Party has headed in has been to not talk about the defining issue of politics, that of class, apart from when Richard Leonard was leader, when it was at the forefront of what we said and what we campaigned on. Back then, we were talking about the Labour values of redistribution, of being fiercely anti-austerity, and that nationalisation of vital industry and services was for the public good. There was clear separation between what we were saying and what we were offering than what the other parties were doing so. However, Richard's tenure did not deliver the change that Scotland needed. He did not get the chance of putting his vision and the members' vision to the country in the 2021 election. Factionalism, the people inside the party were working against that direction. Briefings, leaks and undermining were everyday occurrences and commonplace. The toxicity of Scottish parliamentary politics and the Labour Party decision-making bodies combined to make it incredibly difficult for Richard. That intense factionalism has had its way and been in control of the Scottish Party, with candidate selection processes meaning it is especially difficult for left-wingers to win. And alongside the factionalism and actions of those people in positions of power within the national UK party, then they are all responsible for the atrocious polling 2 months out from the Scottish Parliament elections that sees us remaining the third largest party in Holyrood, with it looking likely we'll have another 5 years of SNP government and Reform looking like they will end up making the official opposition. Now, I go speaking at events up and down the country, listening to Labour Party members and people that identify as being on the left but not necessarily involved with the party. There is still very much an appetite for a Labour Party that is easily identifiable. Many people just don't know who or what we currently stand for. Being thought of as middle of the road and politically bland, with Scottish people not knowing what Labour is anymore, has been shown consistently in us returning less and less MSPs. There is no doubt in my mind anyway that we need to be a party that is unashamedly left-wing in its policies. Let's be the party to talk about class politics with the ideas and policies that reflect that and that have the answers to the problems that we are facing. And essentially, that's why I think it is critical, it is crucial that people stay in the party. Now, I understand why many people have left and why many people, probably even in this call, might be thinking about it. But the current direction cannot and will not continue. There has to be a change. With that change, then the future of our party is there to be won. We need to present a very different vision for the party and for Scotland, not the stale, managed decline with limited policies that we are offering now. We need something bold and transformative for the country. Now, at these members' meetings that I go to, and when I'm with other left-wing socialist Labour MPs in Parliament, I hear the solutions, both economic and social, that can positively transform the country. Everyone here tonight on the call, no matter where you're from, knows that talking about being better managers or being more competent simply will not cut it. That won't get the thousands of historical Scottish Labour voters back supporting the party. We, on the left of the party, have the ideas and the vision. We're not interested whatsoever in managed decline. But first, we must win the internal fight that is coming after May. We need trade unions and trade unionists' input and participation. We need grassroots members to take positions in CLPs, to get people from across our movement standing for future council, Holyrood and Westminster elections. We need to get together and unite behind these solutions, because the fight is for firstly, our party's relevance, but also for our future. Now, in finishing, comrades, it's been said before that as socialists, we are by default optimists. Well, I am anyway. And I know that on the face of it, things look really bleak at the moment. But instead, I think that we have an incredible opportunity to win the future for our party. It'll be difficult, no doubt about it. There will be obstacles, but it's absolutely worth fighting for. The left-wing MPs, those on this call and others in Parliament that have been in Parliament a lot longer than I have, will be doing absolutely everything that we can anyway. So, thanks for listening tonight, comrades. Solidarity.
Thanks so much, Brian. Wonderful to hear from you as always. And now I'm going to swiftly move on to our next speaker, the fantastic Belle Ribeiro Addy.
Sorry, it has actually unmuted me. Thank you. Thank you very much, Richard. And thank you to all of you that have joined the call today and who, are seeing at the moment how important it is that we do exactly what it says on the tin and restore our party's democracy. Now, I think that it's something that is still worth fighting for. And as a lot of people are currently abandoning the party, as Brian has said, I also want to urge people to stay. And I always say that, this is my party. I don't understand why we should have to leave anywhere, and also where is it that exactly that we're going to go to. I, for one, didn't join the Labour Party to be a stepping stone. I joined because I'm a socialist, and I believe that it is a socialist party, and I believe that at its core it is a socialist party. And I think about the fact that even though we're all meant to be Democrats right across our movement, actually right across the country, so often we focus on the leaders as if we're obsessed with some kind of monarchy and who's in charge. But the reality is the core of our Labour Party that matter. And if you look at what our members think and what our members think, particularly about what's happening at the moment, we know what they stand for. And I don't think it's right to abandon them at this time. Now, I remember when I was first elected in 2019, and then a few months later, the leadership changed. I remember Diane Abbott actually saying to me that now it's just going to be a fight to stay a Labour MP. And I wouldn't have thought much of what she was saying then, but now we're talking about Diane Abbott, the first black woman ever elected to UK's Parliament, a woman who fought so many different battles, who has taken so much of the insults of the country and others have thrown at her. And she is not a Labour MP. And I want that to land on people and let it land because it should disturb every single one of us. It wasn't by accident, and neither has some of the consequences that some others had faced by having the whip removed from them. Thankfully, those whips have been restored. I worry about moving away from the members. It seems that's something that we are doing quite a lot. I mean, we're hemorrhaging support and we're hemorrhaging members. And these are good people. These are committed people that have stood with Labour through thick and thin, giving away their weekends, their evenings, their energy. And sometimes giving away to people who they didn't even always necessarily agree with. When I think about how we've campaigned in party elections, because they understood that it was important that we had a Labour government, but they understood that it was important that we had a Labour government because Labour governments have always been at the forefront of some of the most important social changes that we've seen right across our country. I think about the Equalities Act. I think about the NHS. I think about all of these different things that wouldn't have come in place unless there was Labour government. I think about now how we have one of the largest majorities in history and how we are squandering that by doing things which are extremely un-Labour. And I don't know how else to put it, things which do not make sense to our movement, things which do not make sense in terms of the principles that our party was founded on, and things which are making people angry. As I said, yes, we've had years of a Tory government, and in some respects, I think people actually expected some of the things that they did. People expect more of us as Labour, and it may be something that shocks people sometimes, but we should absolutely be living up to those things. Yes, we are always going to be held to a much higher level of accountability, and we should accept that for the simple fact of what we preach. We should accept that for the simple fact of what we preach, and we should accept that when we come in, people don't expect austerity, they do not expect discrimination, they do not expect what we are putting out. And we should absolutely stop trying to out-reform. There are no votes in that. In fact, there are people that have realised that there are no votes in that, and they are now playing on that ground and doing actually very well off the back of us not delivering on those principles on which our party was founded. And we need to be clear about why people elected us. They didn't vote for managed decline. They wanted change. They wanted change. We actually said that we were going to give them change, and we need to make sure that that is just not just rhetoric. You know, a party that promises transformation and you know, has to make sure that it's listening to people, and most importantly, we have to make sure we're listening to our members. And I say that because if we had listened to our members, we would have got so many different things right, and history has always proven that. So fundamentally, just as everybody has said, if we work towards restoring our Labour Party democracy, we will ultimately work towards fixing the direction of our party, and ultimately then work towards delivering the country which we said we were going to do when the country went to the polls last year, or in 2024. And we have to understand that when we fail, when we don't deliver what we're supposed to do, at the end of the day, the whole country suffers. And we're not going to do that by chasing right-wing votes and forgetting those principles on which we were always meant to stand.
Thank you very much, Belle. Thanks so much for that, and a lot of food for thought there. I'll move on to our next speaker, who is doing a fantastic job on the National Executive Committee of the Labour Party, elected by the members to represent them on there, on the left team on the National Executive Committee. Gemma Bolton.
Thanks, Richard. It's great to be here. I think this campaign around restoring Labour democracy is absolutely essential. Our members are the lifeblood of our party, and it's fantastic to see MPs, trade unions and Labour activists make the case for a more democratic party. I've been on Labour's NEC for 6 years now, and I'm standing alongside Yasmin Dar and Minesh Parekh for a fourth term this year, because I believe that a party member is respected and valued at every level. And in my time as a CLP representative, I've witnessed firsthand how much stronger we are as a party when members play a pivotal role. For example, when local parties have a say in parliamentary and council candidates, they feel empowered. It's not up to the likes of Mandelson and McSweeney to decide for CLPs who's going to represent them. And it needs to be given back to the grassroots to be making these decisions. Also, during my time on the NEC, I've seen how quick the leadership has been to suspend dissenting MPs for not turning the line, whilst characters like Mandelson, for example, were given the opportunity to quietly resign when we were all shocked that he wasn't expelled years ago. And also removing hardworking councillors via a mechanism we've got called campaign improvement boards, taking away members' rights to choose their own candidates and often replacing them with people with very little experience. And it's been after years of decline under the Tories that Labour members have been sounding the alarm for transformative policies that we've spoken about today, like public ownership or a wealth tax. And it's members who've stood firm against Trump's illegal and reckless war in Iran and Israel's ongoing genocide in Gaza, whilst our leadership and our government have fallen foul. And we know all too well the fateful mistakes the Labour government has made in the past when it comes to the Middle East, and why we must never make them again. And that's a consequence of a party that fails to listen to its members. It's really damaging. And as people have said tonight, it was proven completely in the recent Gorton and Denton by-election. It looks ridiculous to block Burnham from standing, and it shows a real weakness within the leadership of our party. And Burnham isn't the only one to criticise the government's approach. He certainly won't be the last. So we've had many backbench MPs, trade unionists, members that are unhappy with the stifling of dissent within Labour, and our voices must continue to be raised up and not stamped down by the authoritarian leadership that we currently have. We need a better path forward for the party, otherwise we're really walking off a cliff. And another thing that we were informed of today that was mentioned briefly before by Rachel, some really worrying news regarding the Young Labour and Labour students elections. These committees where socialist candidates and those of independent views from the leadership happen to win a number of seats. And in totally unrelated news, the party decided to rerun the elections. although this is due to like an admin error, this was apparently raised before the elections happened, and they hadn't seen fit to correct it until after young members delivered a set of results which clearly weren't palatable to the leadership. And as Alex and Rachel said before, Momentum and CLPD have put together some rule changes to put forward to conference. So I think they're really important things to start focusing on within our CLPs in thinking about when conference comes, including lowering the MP nomination threshold for future leadership contests, which is something that's going to be essential if we want to get a socialist on the ballot, as well as giving CLPs some power back in the long listing candidates process. So sort of to conclude, to rebuild support, the Labour leadership has to start listening to its membership and offer fundamental change in wealth and power that the public voted for. And to do that, massive steps have to be taken to reinvigorate the party before there's nothing left to save. So internally, we need to be looking to ensure that we apply the rule book and implement the democratic structures for Black, Asian, minority ethnic and disabled members. We need to be reinstating the standalone 2-day women's conference. We need to be working to much strengthen our trade union link, as it has clearly been getting weaker, what with Unite withdrawing money and potential disaffiliations. It's just essential that we rebuild that connection. And as a CLP rep, I'll always speak out on behalf of members by standing up for local parties and opposing any and all anti-democratic rule changes. It's vital that members are allowed to play a key role in how our party succeeds. And finally, a far-right government may only be around the corner, and only a pluralistic and democratic Labour Party is going to be able to defeat it. So we have to restore Labour Party democracy, and we have to start taking action to call out the leadership and the disastrous direction it's taking. Thank you.
So much, Gemma, and thanks once again for all the work you and your colleagues do on the National Executive Committee for members. We've got 3 more speakers left. We've got John McDonnell MP, we've got Rothy from the Socialist Health Association, and we've got Ian Burgon MP to wind up. So next on the list is John McDonnell.
Thanks, Richard. Look, let me just explain what I think about tonight's meeting. I think it's I don't want to exaggerate, but I think it's true. I think it's the most important meeting most of us will be attending this year, because the threat, the political moment is so dangerous. Some of you may have seen in the polls this morning, the polls reflecting the rise of the far right, Marine Le Pen, in the French local elections, and the potential now of them even next year taking the presidency. And that's reflected across Europe, but it's happening in our own country as well. And I think we're on an incredibly dangerous political moment. So it's important that we understand why, in this vitally important political moment, why we need the Labour Party and why it's not there at the moment that will be able to defend us from the rise of the far right in the form of reform. It goes back a bit. I agree with Paul Holden. We're in an existential threat to the Labour Party at the moment. The story goes back like this. Jeremy and I, when Jeremy was elected leader and I became Shadow Chancellor, many of you were involved. And what we did is we brought forward policies that were actually going to be about the biggest transfer of power and wealth in this country from the wealthy, from the corporations to working class people that we'd seen since the Second World War. That's the reality of it. And it was huge. It was momentous development of a policy in favour of working people. The establishment were never going to sit back and allow that to happen if they could help it. So what they wanted to do is, well, obviously they prefer election of a Tory government, but if there was to be a Labour government elected, they wanted to ensure that it never reverted back to those policies. And what better than to fund an organisation within the Labour Party, like Labour Together, because that's what it's done. Huge amounts of money have gone into Labour Together. Read Paul's book. It sets it all out in detail, forensic detail, pardon the expression. And that group was funded to an extent that it could then potentially win the leadership of the Labour Party, and that's what it did. Selected a candidate who, as others have said, was elected on a platform which was, as he said, drawn upon the manifestos that Jeremy and I and all of you supported. He described them as his foundational document for the future. And then I think less than 48 hours after his election, he'd dumped virtually every policy he stood on. And therefore, once he got elected, his job was to stabilise the system. And that's what he did. He stabilised the system for capital, as far as I'm concerned. And then you have this series of policies, for example, not scrapping the 2-child limit, the welfare benefit cuts, the winter fuel cuts, and then, of course, Gaza and the appointment of Mandelson. On each of those policies, basically, what happened was those of us who reflect Labour Party traditions and values stood up and said, these aren't Labour. These aren't things that a Labour government does. We don't cut benefits to working class people. We don't attack disabled people. So the result was those of us who were standing up, we lost the whip, others were intimidated, that sort of thing. But more importantly than that, what it did, it created a level of disillusionment with Labour that I've not seen. I've been in the party 50 years and I've never seen this level of anger about some of the things that we've done in government, and anger about some of the individuals as well. You know, the response about Keir Starmer on the doorstep, I've never experienced under any Labour leader. And what you can understand why, because people have gone through 14 years of austerity. They've had their wages frozen, they've had their services cut, and they felt no one was listening to them, but they thought, well, at least there's a Labour government coming. At least we've elected a Labour government and things will change, because they promised change. And there's been very little change, so it's led to disillusionment. And what happens when people are disillusioned? They'll look around for other alternatives. And so reform have filled that vacuum. And the reason these policy mistakes are made is a part about the general ethos of the Labour Party and the Labour leadership at the moment. They don't see themselves as a challenge to the distribution of wealth inequality in our society. They see themselves as a stabilising influence, if at best. But the reason we've got to this situation is that time after time, people have been let down. They're looking, therefore, towards reform. And the reason they've been let down is because all those people, the rank and file of the Labour Party, who would have, through democratic procedures, been able to actually stand up and explain to the Labour leadership that this is what a Labour government does. All those conduits for democratic practice, involvement, engagement have virtually been closed down. The selection of candidates, parliamentary candidates, it looks as though it was Morgan McSweeney and Peter Mandelson sitting down and selecting who would be parachuted in where, or who would be allowed to stand. And if you weren't seen as effectively lobby fodder or supporters of the right, you were blocked. Then that goes even to the councillor selection level. I've had a whole range of councillors blocked in my constituency party. And it also goes for members. At one point, if you remember, constituency Labour parties weren't even allowed to talk about Gaza. So that denial of democracy has meant that huge mistakes have been made by this government. It's meant that the level of direction has been so centralised in the form of this group around Labour together that actually the electorate are reacting to it. Look at the council by-election results we're getting. We're lucky if we come third in some seats. Rarely do we win them these days. People have cited Gorton. Horrendous. And I'm really worried about May. No matter how hard we're working on the ground at the moment, it looks as though we won't be able to turn it. That's why the only way that will save this party, that's my view, and it is about saving it, the only way we'll save it is if we restore democracy to the party. And Labour 120 years ago, the Labour Party adopted the name Labour Party, and it was based upon exactly as Brian said, because people knew who we stood for, working class people. They understood what we stood for, which was based socialism, and that includes the redistribution of wealth and power in favour of working people. Now they don't. So our job now is to do everything we can to restore democracy to the party. And it's very basic, isn't it, really? Allowing parties to select the candidates without interference from the centralised officers up from above. Allowing MPs to express a view, and yes, and dissent if necessary, without the loss of the whip. And allow a leadership election where actually you can have candidates from all wings of the party standing. It's not much to ask, and in some ways it's just restoring what we took, unfortunately, I think we took for granted. But it does mean as well, recognise we're up against an incredibly powerful faction, one that's incredibly well funded, is, I think, a voice for people who simply want to use the Labour Party in government to maintain their wealth and power. And so we need to know what we're up against. And that's why these coming months are so important. It's important that we go into this period in which trade union conferences are meeting, when CLP are meetings, we're preparing resolutions for Labour Party conference. And this year's Labour Party conference could be critical in saving the Labour Party from this faction around Labour Together, and actually making sure that we've got a Labour Party in the future, one that people feel is worth voting for. Because if we don't, I don't see any other vehicle that can achieve what we aim to achieve when we were founded, as I said, the socialist practice in this country. Thanks, Richard.
Thanks so much, John. An inspiring speech about the tasks that are ahead and also setting the historical context. I'm really delighted that we've got a guest speaker from a really fantastic socialist society affiliated to the Labour Party, the Socialist Health Association, whose work is more important than ever. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce Dr. Rathi Guhadasan. Dr. Rathi.
Thank you so much. And this has been an excellent meeting, and I'm very grateful to have the opportunity to speak on behalf of the Socialist Health Association and highlight some of the issues we've had in trying to progress our policies through the party and being blocked by anti-democratic party processes. So just a couple of examples, starting with conference. So in 2022, we had a successful conference motion which was about returning the NHS to full public ownership and provision, which passed unanimously. But then following that, for the next 2 years, we saw the priorities ballot being used in a way to influence the debate rather than select topics for debate. So NHS motions were split rather than being all grouped in one category. So you had one main category with motions that essentially offering very uncontroversial praise and not really saying very much about the NHS policy of the Labour Party, no critique, no policy change, and they were all grouped under a very obvious NHS sounding title and very high up on the priorities ballot list, whereas ours would be near the bottom, maybe with one or two kind of unrelated NHS policy motions. And with only 6 votes, it's unlikely that delegates are going to vote for 2 NHS categories, and the list was presented in a way that ours was almost hidden. And what this means, we feel, is that this crucial issue of NHS privatisation, which evidence shows costs us not only in money, but in widening health inequalities and preventable deaths. This issue is not being debated by members as it should be in the compositing room or on the conference floor. It's being decided by the Conference Arrangements Committee. And so, I mean, we're not speaking from a place of entitlement because of our long-standing affiliation or our specific expertise around health. We're asking for a fair opportunity to present and debate our arguments. We're confident in our positions. We feel that we have the evidence for them, and we feel that's how the party should operate, and that's kind of what's being denied. And we're not the only ones that have been affected by that kind of use of the priorities ballot. It's been used in that way for other issues as well. And the second issue I wanted to quickly raise is around corporate donations. So Wes Streeting, it's well known, has received donations from private healthcare interests of almost £400,000. He's not the only one, but obviously we're interested in health, and so we're interested in the Secretary of State for Health. Now, we exist primarily on modest member subscriptions, and the problem is that represents a hugely significant difference in our ability to disseminate our message and campaign effectively compared to someone who's, receiving that amount of funding. That funding is not going to the man, it's going to the office, but it's pushing a particular policy interest that is not in the interest of NHS staff or patients. And so last year, instead of a contemporary motion, we submitted a rule change, so that we hope will be coming up for the 2026 conference. It's called Cash for Influences, and it's about ending the ability of private sector interest to unduly influence policy. Actually, our successful 2022 conference motion did say that ministers should not accept donations from companies interested in outsourcing of NHS functions. So this is simply extrapolating from that. It's not limited to the health sector. This rule change obviously applies to all sectors. But we know already that from our previous motion that this would be popular with the members if it was allowed to be presented and debated in the right way. So I hope that CLPs and affiliates will be able to support this. It can be viewed on our website, and I'll try to share the link if I can. Happy to be contacted on this. And finally, there is a lot more to do, as others have already said, and not least in terms of National Policy Forum representation. So the Socialist Education Association and ourselves, we passed a motion amongst the socialist societies to have speaking rights on the national policy forums in the areas relevant to our areas of expertise. That was almost a year ago. This was trying to counteract, again, some of the factionalism that blocks us actually, properly discussing policy that directly affects people's lives and is causing suffering right now. So that, again, that motion was passed, and we're still trying to push to see that enacted. So I'll stop there, but thank you so much for listening and solidarity.
Thanks, Dr. Rathin. Thanks so much for also to all your colleagues from the Socialist Health Association who bring such an important voice to the table. It's important that your voice is listened to and respected and acted upon. And this brings me to our final speaker tonight, who is the fantastic Labour MP for Liverpool West Derby, Ian Byrne, who's been at the forefront of so many fights for justice in relation to the Hillsborough Law, in relation to the right to food, in relation to keeping going with his socialist politics. Ian Byrne here to close the meeting. Or is he not here to close the meeting? Has he disappeared? Bear with me 1 second. Connection's just gone. His connection just gone. So what I'll do, I'll busk for a few seconds whilst he's downstairs. His office is 2 floors down from mine. So he'll be with us in a second, I'm sure. But I think it's been a fantastic meeting and a really important discussion. But it's just the first step, really, in trying to popularise this campaign and take it out. So the demand comes loud and clear from Labour Party members and from trade unions and from affiliated socialist societies that Labour Party members deserve democracy. We can't be treated with contempt anymore. And when a nasty factionalism takes control at the top of the Labour Party, then what we end up with is the Labour Party leadership making disastrous decisions divorced from reality. And all that ends up doing is accidentally paving the way for what would be the first far-right government in our country's history. Because make no mistake, all the opinion polls show that if there were a general election tomorrow, the most likely outcome would be that there would be a reform government, a Trump-style government in our country. And we can't allow that to happen. It would be unforgivable if we allow that to happen. And exciting update for everyone still on the call. In 30 seconds, Ian Byrne will be joining us. He's a Liverpool fan. They always do need a bit of time added on to get what they want, that team. So he'll be with us in a few seconds.
Steady on.
Well, I'm getting told off by John McDonnell there, not for the first time. But I think that really the task in front of us is a hugely important one. And I want to just briefly, before Ian joins us, reflect upon the fact that our meeting was opened by two socialist general secretaries of affiliated Labour Party unions. And that's wonderful. You know, we've seen Andrea, newly elected. We've seen Steve Wright speak tonight. We've seen our representatives from the National Executive Committee. And the cherry on the top, or the icing on the cake, Ian Byrne has now arrived in my office. So he's breathless. He's run up the stairs like a super sub. He reminds me of Jan Molby, actually. People can look that up. And he can now speak. He's going to close the meeting. Thanks so much for all of you for attending. Ian Byrne MP.
Thanks, Richard, and apologies, comrades, for the slight mix-up, but yeah, we got here in the end. I think it's been a brilliant meeting. It's been so informative about the situation where we are now and where we find ourselves. I think for me, I'd just like to touch on some of the things that we're doing which are really positive. So we're at the moment doing a Right to Food Commission, which we've been in Liverpool, Knowsley, and the week before last we were in Easington, Newcastle, and the idea is to create a roadmap for the right to food. And you know, that's the sort of thing that many of us MPs are actually doing, who believe in those socialist principles. We haven't been parachuted in as lobbyists. We're the ones who obviously Labour Together tried to take out. And just listening to Paul Holden, you know, listening to what he's talking about and how Labour Together they've acted, you know, I've got personal experience, myself and my office, you know, they decided to take us out in 2022, and some of the most nefarious tactics seen, and what Labour Together did to us to try and take us out the seat is well documented. And you know, we were the ones that the friendly journalists to Labour Together said they were going to take out. Those journalists weren't the ones who they actually spied on, but they were the friendly journalists, and they said that, you know, Labour Together under McSweeney wanted to take out socialist MPs, and they took a few of us out, and the experiences we had were unbelievable. And you know, what's always enlightening to me is the very people that were involved in that, with voter rigging, some of the most awful tactics were actually rewarded by Labour Together and McSweeney, and now they're in positions in North West region, which is remarkable. But I'm hoping that Paul's book and what we've actually seen with Mandelson, the resignation of McSweeney, and obviously the call for the independent investigation into Labour Together's modus operandum and what they've actually done to our party is listened to, and we can move forward with a independent investigation and get to the bottom of what they've tried to do, because what they've actually done is created an existential threat to the very Labour Party. And I firmly believe that. Just last week in Liverpool in local council election, Labour's vote dropped by 20%. They came third in a seat they held under Jeremy and John's leadership in 2019. We came third in Liverpool. Our seats in Liverpool are actually under threat by both the Reformed and Greens. Now, this is Labour heartlands we're talking about, which has been discussed at length on this programme tonight. So, for me, we've got to confront what Labour Together have done. McSweeney, Mandelson, the clique, Starmer, the top. At the top of the party, we've got to begin to address that, and membership democracy is at the very heart of that, putting the power back in members' hands, listening to the trade unions, to the general secretaries, or today I spoke really eloquently tonight, and the associations, but just listen to the members, listen to MPs that care about the party, people like John McDonnell, who've been around for decades trying to shape the Labour Party and do the right thing by the people who we represent. And that's the very heart of what I feel as though we should be as socialist Labour MPs as part of that movement. So I think it's still worth fighting for. I think we're the only party or part of a progressive alliance that could beat reform, because as John said, you know, the consequences if we don't do that are absolutely terrifying for this country and future generations, and I don't want to stand by and let that happen. I don't want that to happen under my watch. So tonight, for me, it's a hugely important meeting, as been said already. This is about reclaiming the democracy in our party, taking back control, and then taking the fight to the far right, because that's what we need to be doing. So solidarity, comrades. I hope you've enjoyed tonight. I hope it's been informative, which it really has. And we move on, because it's the very first meeting, the very first stage of what we're trying to do, reclaiming democracy back in our party. Thanks very much.
Ended it, haven't you?
Yeah.
Very good, well done.
Okay.